Deep in the crystalline spires of the Grand Archives, Chief Archivist Kylax stood motionless before the quantum display, their iridescent scales shifting from deep blue to anxious purple. The signal shouldn't exist. According to every historical record in the Archive's vast database, it couldn't exist. Yet there it was, pulsing with stubborn defiance against the backdrop of galactic background radiation. "Apprentice Zena," Kylax called, their voice resonating through the chamber's perfect acoustics. "Please verify these readings. I fear my primary optical cluster may be malfunctioning." Zena glided across the polished floor, her hover field barely disturbing the thin layer of preservation mist that kept the ancient artifacts in their pristine state. Unlike her mentor's reptilian appearance, Zena's species resembled a cross between an earth jellyfish and a sunflower, though neither she nor Kylax had ever seen such creatures outside of prohibited historical texts. "Of course, Chief Archivist," she replied, extending a sensory tendril toward the display. "Though your optical clusters have never shown signs of..." "Oh." The signal continued its steady rhythm, a clear artificial pattern emerging from the chaos of space. Its origin point lay in Sector 617, a region of space that had been officially designated as permanently uninhabitable due to quantum instabilities for the past 1,000 years. The same sector that, according to certain restricted files Zena had accessed during her late-night study sessions, had once been home to a species that now existed only in myth. "It bears certain similarities to patterns described in the Forbidden Codex," Zena said carefully, her chromatic pods flickering with suppressed excitement. The Forbidden Codex was officially a work of cautionary fiction, meant to warn young archivists about the dangers of falsifying historical records. But Zena had long suspected there was more to it than that. Kylax's scales shifted to a deep green of contemplation. "That observation borders on historical heresy, Apprentice. The Codex is meant to teach proper archival methodology, nothing more." But their tale, usually kept in perfect professional stillness, twitched slightly. "Of course, Chief Archivist. However, purely as an academic exercise, might we compare the signal's pattern to the theoretical communications protocols described in Chapter 7? The ones supposedly used by the..." Zena paused, then spoke the forbidden word, "humans." The preservation mist swirled around them as Kylax moved to a nearby console, their claws dancing across the quantum crystal interface. "Purely as an academic exercise," they agreed, their voice dropping to barely more than a whisper. "And purely to definitively prove that no such correlation exists." The analysis took exactly 2.47 minutes. When the results appeared, both archivists stared in silence at the display. The signal's encoding was a 99.97% match for the supposedly fictional human communication protocols. "This must be reported to the Council," Kylax said finally, their scales now a mottled mix of worried orange and dutiful blue. "Must it?" Zena's tendrils curled thoughtfully. "The regulations regarding fictional species are quite clear. Any data suggesting their actual existence must be thoroughly verified before troubling the Council with purely theoretical concerns." Kylax's tail twitched again. They had spent 3 centuries as Chief Archivist, carefully maintaining the official histories exactly as the Council required. But before that, they had been young once, filled with questions about the convenient gaps in galactic history, the strange absences in otherwise complete records. The verification protocols for such cases are quite extensive. Kylax said slowly. They would require deep access to numerous restricted archives. Access that, as Chief Archivist, I am technically authorized to grant to my apprentice for educational purposes. "I would be most grateful for such an educational opportunity," Zena replied, her chromatic pods glowing with barely contained enthusiasm. Over the next several hours, they dove deep into the archive's most restricted sections. Each new piece of data they uncovered seemed to hint at an impossible truth. The signal was just the beginning. There were other anomalies, unexplained energy readings from the supposedly uninhabitable sector, gravitational distortions that suggested artificial origin, and most damning of all, gaps in the historical record that became more prominent the more closely they looked. "Look at this," Xena called, her tendrils wrapped around an ancient data crystal. A survey report from just before Sector 617 was declared uninhabitable. The quantum instability cited as the reason for the quarantine. They don't match any known natural phenomenon. The energy signature almost looks like an artificial barrier. Kylax finished, their scales now an ashen gray. Xena, Access Protocol Index 7 Alpha 9. Authorization. Kylax Prime Archive Override. A new section of the archive shimmed into existence, its quantum-locked storage units holding data so classified that most beings didn't even know it existed. Kylax moved to the central unit, their claws trembling slightly as they initiated the decryption sequence. "Chief Archivist," Xena said, her voice unusually serious, "are you certain? This level of access will result in our immediate execution if we're discovered." Kylax finished. "But if what we found is true, if the signal really is what we think it is, then everything we know about galactic history might be a lie. And as archivists, we have a duty to the truth that transcends even council law." The decryption completed with a soft chime. The files that appeared before them told a story so incredible, so terrifying, that both archivists found themselves backing away from the display. 1,000 years ago, humanity had not been a myth. They had been real, vital, and expanding through the galaxy at a pace that had terrified the established species. Their technology had advanced decades in the span of years, their adaptability and creativity marking them as either the greatest threat or greatest hope the galaxy had ever seen. And then, according to the official records, they had vanished. Their worlds had been declared uninhabitable, their existence relegated to myth, their very memory transformed into a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked expansion. But the signal pulsing on their quantum display told a different story. Humanity hadn't vanished. They had been hidden away, locked behind an artificial barrier by a council that feared what they might become. And now, after 1,000 years of isolation, they were reaching out again. "Xena," Kylax said, their scales shifting to the deep red of determination. "I believe it's time for us to do something tremendously foolish." "You mean?" "Yes, we're going to answer their signal. The galaxy deserves to know the truth. And humanity deserves to be remembered." As they began composing their response, neither archivist noticed the subtle security alert that flickered across a distant monitor, signaling that their unauthorized access had not gone entirely undetected. In the depths of the Council's security complex, ancient protocols began to activate, preparing to protect a 1,000-year-old secret that was about to unravel. The deeper levels of the Grand Archives existed in perpetual twilight, illuminated only by the soft bioluminescence of preservation fields and the occasional spark of quantum data transfers. Kylax and Xena had descended past the public levels, past the restricted sections, into areas that officially didn't exist at all. Here, the very architecture seemed to resist their presence, corridors shifting and reforming as ancient security systems tried to confuse their path. "Another dead end," Xena observed, her tendrils twisting in frustration as they encountered yet another seamlessly sealed wall. "The archives themselves are fighting us." Kylax pressed their scaled hand against the wall's surface, feeling the subtle vibrations of the security systems within. "Not fighting," they corrected, their scales shifting to a thoughtful copper hue. "Testing. These systems aren't trying to stop us. They're measuring our determination." As if in response to their words, the wall shimmered and became transparent, revealing a vast circular chamber beyond. Unlike the crystalline elegance of the upper archives, this space was crafted from materials that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Ancient data stacks rose from floor to ceiling like the spines of some impossibly large creature, each one humming with contained information. "The true archive," Kylax whispered, their professional composure cracking slightly. "I heard rumors, but look." Zena's excitement caused her entire form to pulse with bioluminescence as she glided toward the nearest data stack. "These aren't quantum crystals. They're organic memory structures, technology that existed before the Council's standardization protocols." They moved deeper into the chamber, each step revealing new wonders and horrors. Here was a visual record showing massive ships of unfamiliar design, their hulls bearing markings that matched no known civilization. There, a suspended hologram depicted beings walking upright on two legs, their forms both familiar and alien. "These must be the humans," Zena said, extending a tendril toward the hologram. "But why are there so many different types? Their physical variation is impossible." Kylax finished, their scales now a deep purple of concern. No species could maintain genetic diversity at this level and remain stable. Unless they moved to another data stack, their claws flying across its ancient interface. Unless that very adaptability was what made them so dangerous to the Council's order. The records they uncovered told a story that grew more disturbing with each revelation. Humanity hadn't just been advancing quickly. They had been evolving, adapting, changing in ways that defied the Council's understanding of biology. While other species took millennia to develop new traits, humans could alter their very nature within generations. "Here," Zena called, her tendrils wrapped around a particularly ancient data core. The Council's first contact report. They expected to find primitive beings still learning to harness fusion power. Instead, they found a species that had gone from atmospheric flight to faster-than-light travel in less than 3 centuries. Kylax moved to join her, their tail twitching with suppressed emotion. And look at these social development metrics. Every time they encountered a limitation, they found a way around it. When resources grew scarce, they developed new extraction methods. When their biology couldn't handle deep space, they'd modify themselves. When traditional computing reached its limits, they merged with their machines. Zena finished, her chromatic pods flickering rapidly as she processed the implications. Not full integration like the synthetic collective, but a symbiosis that enhanced both. The chamber's darkness seemed to deepen around them as they continued their research. The story that emerged was not one of humanity's extinction, but of the Council's fear. They had watched this young species overcome challenge after challenge, develop solution after solution, each innovation bringing them closer to matching the Council's power. "The final report," Kylax said, their voice barely above a whisper as they accessed the last data stack. The Council's decision was unanimous. Humanity's rate of advancement was deemed an existential threat to galactic stability. The barrier wasn't just meant to contain them, it was meant to reset them. Zena's form contracted slightly. Reset them. The barrier was designed to create a temporal recursion field. Inside, time would flow differently. The Council believed that by isolating humanity and forcing them to repeatedly face the same challenges, they would eventually develop along more predictable lines. But the signal they had detected suggested something had gone very wrong with that plan. Or perhaps very right. From humanity's perspective, a soft chime echoed through the chamber, causing both archivists to freeze. Someone had accessed the upper levels of the restricted section. Someone with high-level security clearance. "We need to leave," Kylax said, their scales shifting to alarmed crimson. But first, their claws moved across the nearest interface, initiating a massive data transfer to their personal quantum storage. "Chief Archivist," Zena said, her tone formal despite the urgency of the moment. "That's a violation of at least 15 different archive protocols." "The protocols exist to preserve truth," Kylax replied, watching the transfer progress with intense focus. "What we found here suggests they're being used to bury it instead." They turned to their apprentice, their scales now showing the deep gold of absolute conviction. "The signal we detected, I don't think it was an accident. I think after 1,000 years, humanity has found a way to break through the temporal recursion. They're not just reaching out, they're breaking free." The security chimes sounded again, closer this time. As they hurried toward the chamber's exit, Zena's tendrils curled thoughtfully. If the barrier is failing, if humanity has really spent 1,000 years overcoming a temporal prison, what have they become? Kylax's answer was cut short by the sound of approaching footsteps. As they rushed through the twisting corridors of the deep archive, both archivists knew their lives would never be the same. They had uncovered a truth that would shake the galaxy's foundations, assuming they lived long enough to share it. The lower rings of Station Nexus 7 hummed with the constant activity of 1,000 different species, each pursuing their own interests in the sprawling marketplace of information and secrets. This was where the galaxy's outcasts and truth-seekers gathered, far from the Council's officially sanctioned channels of knowledge. Kylax's scales had shifted to match the dull gray of the station's walls, a necessary camouflage that still felt like a betrayal of their archivist's dignity. "Are you certain about this contact?" Kylax whispered to Zena, who had compressed her luminescent form into a more humanoid shape, her tendrils contained within the rough outline of a maintenance worker's environment suit. Dr. Ven's research into temporal mechanics was branded as dangerously speculative by the Council, Zena replied, her modified vocal synthesizer perfectly mimicking the local dialect, which, given what we now know, probably means she was getting too close to the truth. They found Dr. Ven in her workshop, buried beneath layers of experimental equipment and holographic displays. The physicist's crystalline body structure caught and refracted the dim light, making her exact position difficult to determine, an effect Kylax suspected was intentional. The disgraced chief archivist and their rebellious apprentice, Dr. Ven's voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, here to discuss impossible signals from impossible beings. Kylax's scales flickered in surprise. "How did you?" "Information is my true field of study." The crystalline physicist shifted, resolving into a more distinct form. "Temporal mechanics are merely a hobby. One that got me excommunicated from the Council's scientific community when I suggested that the quantum instabilities in Sector 617 showed signs of intelligent design." "We can prove you were right," Zena said, extending a data crystal. "But we need your help to understand what humanity might have become after 1,000 years of temporal isolation." Dr. Ven's crystalline surface rippled with interest as she absorbed the data. "Fascinating. The Council's barrier wasn't just for containment, it was an attempt at forced evolution. But they fundamentally misunderstood human nature. Instead of breaking them, the temporal recursion gave them infinite opportunities to perfect their response to adversity." "Perfect their response?" Kylax asked, their tail twitching nervously. "Think about it." Dr. Ven's form pulsed with excitement. Every time the temporal loop reset, their conscious memories might have been wiped, but their civilizational knowledge, their instincts, their very DNA would have retained echoes of previous iterations. They weren't just surviving the recursion. They were learning from it. Their discussion was interrupted by a soft chime from one of Ven's security systems. "We have another visitor," she announced. "One I think you'll want to meet." The workshop's door dissolved, revealing a towering figure that seemed to be composed entirely of living metal and shifting shadows. Ambassador Exor. The being introduced itself, its voice a harmony of mechanical and organic tones. "Former diplomatic liaison to the Synthetic Collective, until I asked too many questions about certain historical anomalies in our shared databases." The Synthetic Collective. Zena's tendrils twisted with interest. "The only civilization that ever approached humanity's rate of technological advancement." "Because we learned from them," Koa replied, though that fact was carefully erased from official records. "The Collective's early encounters with humanity shaped our entire approach to evolution and consciousness. When they vanished, we were told they had destroyed themselves. Some of us never believed that explanation." Over the next several hours, more truth-seekers arrived at Ven's workshop. Each brought their own piece of the puzzle. A quantum archaeologist who had discovered anomalous energy readings from the barrier. A memory walker who had gathered fragments of suppressed cultural memories from a dozen species, even a rogue council security eye that had achieved true consciousness while analyzing patterns in redacted historical data. "The signal is only the beginning," Dr. Venn announced, her crystalline form projecting a complex temporal map. "Look at these patterns. The barrier isn't failing. It's being systematically dismantled. Humanity isn't just breaking free. They're deconstructing the very principles of temporal physics that were used to contain them." "But why now?" Kylax asked, their scales shifting through patterns of confusion. "After 1,000 years. Because they finally solved it." Kaxor's metallic form resonated with certainty. "Think about what they've achieved. They've taken a prison of endless repetition and turned it into a laboratory of infinite possibility. Every reset gave them another chance to experiment, to evolve, to transcend their limitations. And now they're ready," the memory walker finished, their multifaceted eyes gleaming. "The question is, ready for what?" The answer came in the form of a massive power surge that rippled through the station, causing every piece of technology to momentarily flicker. When the system stabilized, every display in Ven's workshop showed the same image, a technical diagram of the barrier, being transmitted on all frequencies. "It's not just a signal," Dr. Venn whispered, her crystalline surface fracturing and reforming with excitement. "It's an invitation. They're showing us exactly how the barrier works and how they learn to break it. Why would they share such knowledge?" Kylax wondered, their scales now a swirling mix of curiosity and concern. "Because they want us to understand," Zena replied, her tendrils weaving complex patterns in the air as she analyzed the transmission. "This isn't just about breaking free. They're showing us that they could have broken free at any time. They chose to wait until they could do it without destroying the very fabric of space-time." The implication slowly dawned on the assembled truth seekers. Humanity hadn't just survived their imprisonment, they had mastered it. And now they were reaching out not in anger or revenge, but with an offer to share what they had learned. A new signal began to pulse through the station's systems, its pattern different from the first, but unmistakably of human origin. As Dr. Venn began to decode it, none of them realized they were about to become part of humanity's first official communication with the galaxy in 1,000 years, or that the Council's worst fears about human advancement were about to be proven both completely right and utterly wrong. The observation deck of Station Nexus 7 offered an unobstructed view of the phenomenon that had the entire galaxy holding its breath. The temporal barrier, invisible for a millennium, had begun to manifest in normal space-time. It appeared as a vast curtain of shifting energy, rippling with colors that shouldn't exist, stretching across the stars like a luminous wound in reality. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Dr. Venn's crystalline form refracted the barrier's impossible light. "We're watching 1,000 years of temporal physics being undone with surgical precision." Kylax's scales had settled into a deep blue of awe as they watched the display. Beside them, Zena had expanded her consciousness field to better perceive the multiple layers of reality being affected by the barrier's dissolution. The other truth seekers they'd gathered were similarly transfixed, each perceiving the event through their unique senses. "The Council's fleet is mobilizing," Ambassador Exor announced, their living metal form processing multiple data streams simultaneously. "They're attempting to establish a containment perimeter around Sector 617. A bitter laugh echoed from the rogue eye's quantum processor. "Like trying to hold back a supernova with a solar sail. They still don't understand what they're dealing with." The barrier's disruption had begun 3 days ago, shortly after humanity's technical specifications had been broadcast across the galaxy. But instead of the catastrophic collapse many had feared, they were witnessing something far more extraordinary, a controlled deconstruction of the temporal prison, layer by subtle layer. "Look at these energy readings," Dr. Venn projected a holographic analysis. "They're not just dismantling the barrier, they're preserving its underlying structure. The mathematical precision required for such an operation is beyond anything we thought possible." The quantum archaeologist finished, their probability shifted form flickering with excitement. They're not destroying the Council's work, they're transcending it. The first visual contact came without warning. Every display on the station suddenly activated, showing the same image. A room that somehow managed to look both perfectly ordinary and utterly alien. The beings within it appeared mostly human-like, but there was something about their movements, their presence, that suggested they were far more than their physical forms implied. "Greetings, Galaxy," the figure at the center spoke, their voice carrying harmonic undertones that conveyed meanings beyond mere words. "We apologize for our long silence, but we needed time to understand what we had become." Kylax felt their scales ripple with shock as they recognized elements of multiple species technologies integrated seamlessly into the humans' environment. They had not just recreated their civilization, they had synthesized everything they had ever known into something entirely new. The temporal recursion field was meant to be our prison. The human continued, a slight smile playing across their features. Instead, it became our greatest teacher. Each reset gave us another chance to experiment, to learn, to grow. We experienced the same moments countless times, trying new approaches, testing different solutions, until we understood not just the how of our universe, but the why. The station's sensors began detecting massive energy signatures emerging from behind the failing barrier. But instead of the warships many had feared, they saw structures that defied conventional physics, architecture that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, vessels that seemed to be grown rather than built, technology that blurred the line between the organic and artificial. "We could have broken free centuries ago," another human explained, their form shifting slightly to reveal the neural interfaces that augmented their natural abilities. "But we chose to wait until we could do so without risking the very fabric of space-time, until we could be certain that our emergence would not harm those who feared us so much they tried to erase us from history." Zena's tendrils coiled in recognition. "They've achieved it," she whispered. "True synthesis of all paths of advancement. Biological, technological, psychological, and temporal." The Council's response came swiftly, but not in the form anyone expected. Instead of weapons, their ships began broadcasting on all frequencies. "This is High Counselor Vax. To the human representatives, we acknowledge our ancestors' actions and request immediate diplomatic contact. To all Galaxy citizens, the historical records are being unsealed. The time of secrets is ending." What followed was unlike any first contact situation in galactic history. Humanity didn't simply emerge from their isolation. They brought with them solutions to problems the Council had grappled with for millennia. Sustainable energy generation, faster than light travel without temporal distortion, methods of expanding consciousness without losing individuality. "They're not conquering the galaxy," Ambassador Exer observed, their mechanical systems humming with revelation. "They're uplifting it." As the barrier continued its controlled dissolution, more human ships emerged, each one a testament to what they had achieved in their isolation. But it was their next transmission that truly demonstrated how far they had come. "We hold no grudge against the Council or its peoples," the human representative announced. "Fear of the unknown is a natural response. But we've learned that the greatest achievements come not from fear, but from curiosity. Not from isolation, but from connection. We offer everything we've learned, freely and without condition. The only question is, are you ready to learn with us?" The truth seekers gathered on the observation deck exchanged glances, each understanding that they were witnessing not just the return of a lost species, but the dawn of a new era in galactic history. The barrier that had been meant to contain humanity had instead forced them to achieve their ultimate potential. And now, after 1,000 years of preparation, they were ready to share what they had become. As Kylax watched the spectacle unfold, their scales shifted to a color they had never displayed before. A shimmering hue that somehow captured both hope and uncertainty in a single chromatic expression. The galaxy was about to change forever, and no amount of archival protocol could have prepared them for what was coming. The Grand Archives had changed. Where once there had been carefully controlled information flow and restricted access, now data streamed freely through crystalline channels, filling the ancient halls with the light of unfiltered truth. Kylax stood in their old office, their scales shifting through patterns of wonder as they watched historical records being restored in real time. "The integration teams are ready," Xena announced, her consciousness field rippling with barely contained excitement. The former apprentice had grown into her role as liaison between the archives and humanity's knowledge repositories. Though I suspect integration might be an understatement for what we're about to attempt. The past month had transformed the galaxy more profoundly than the previous 1,000 years combined. Humanity's emergence had triggered not just a technological revolution, but a fundamental shift in how species viewed themselves and their place in the cosmos. "Have you reviewed the latest synthesis protocols?" Dr. Van's crystalline form materialized in the office, now augmented with human-derived quantum interfaces that allowed her to exist in multiple probability states simultaneously. "They're not just combining our knowledge bases, they're creating an entirely new way of understanding reality itself." The humans had brought with them not just advanced technology, but a completely novel approach to existence. Their time in the temporal recursion field had taught them to perceive reality as malleable, filled with infinite possibilities rather than fixed constants. They had learned to manipulate not just matter and energy, but the very fabric of space-time itself. "The council chambers are ready for the first official integration ceremony," Ambassador Exor announced, their living metal form now seamlessly blending organic, mechanical, and quantum components. Though I suspect even they don't fully understand what they're about to witness. The ceremony was to be held in the transformed heart of the Council's ancient citadel, where once there had been closed chambers and secret meetings, now stood an open amphitheater that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once, its architecture defying conventional physics while remaining somehow harmoniously balanced. As they made their way through the citadel's restored halls, Kylax reflected on how quickly fear had turned to fascination. The Council, faced with irrefutable evidence of humanity's peaceful intentions, had done something unprecedented. They had admitted their mistake. The official announcement had sent shockwaves through galactic society. 1,000 years of historical censorship acknowledged and reversed in a single moment. "Look at this." Xena's tendrils wrapped around a data stream, extracting the specific memory fragment. The humans didn't just preserve their own history during the recursion. They somehow managed to preserve ours as well. Stories and memories we thought were lost forever. They kept them safe, understanding their importance even as we tried to forget them. The amphitheater was filled with representatives from every known species, each modified in their own unique way by the integration of human-derived technologies. But it was the humans themselves who drew every eye. They moved through the crowd with an easy grace that belied their true nature. Beings who had transcended traditional definitions of existence. "We gather today not to merge our civilizations," the human representative began, their form shifting subtly to be more easily perceived by each species present, "but to remember that we were never truly separate. The barrier that divided us was built on fear, but it taught us the greatest lesson of all. That isolation only leads to stagnation. True growth comes from connection." As they spoke, the air itself seemed to come alive with possibility. Streams of data and consciousness flowed freely between species, barriers of communication and understanding dissolving as rapidly as the temporal prison had. The humans hadn't just brought new technology, they had brought a new way of being. "The temporal recursion field forced us to experience the same moments countless times," another human explained, their voice carrying harmonics that spoke directly to each listener's deepest understanding. "But instead of breaking us, it taught us that every moment contains infinite potential. We learned to see time not as a linear progression, but as an ocean of possibility." The ceremony reached its climax as the humans unveiled their greatest gift, a way for species to share not just information or technology, but experience itself. The process they had developed allowed consciousness to flow between individuals while maintaining distinct identities, creating a network of understanding that transcended traditional boundaries. Kylax felt their scales shift to a color they had no name for as they participated in the first mass consciousness sharing. Through the network, they experienced fragments of humanity's journey. The initial fear and rage at their imprisonment, the gradual understanding of the opportunity it presented, the countless iterations of civilization as they perfected their response to adversity. We offer this connection freely, the human representative continued, but we also offer a warning. What we have become is not an endpoint, but a beginning. The universe is vast, and we have only scratched the surface of what's possible. Will you join us in exploring it? The response was immediate and overwhelming. Species that had once feared humanity now eagerly sought to learn from them. The Council, stripped of its secrets, transformed into a true forum for galactic cooperation. The archives, once a tool of control, became a living repository of shared experience and knowledge. As the ceremony concluded, Kylax found themselves in conversation with one of the human representatives. "You know," the human said, their form shifting slightly to better match Kylax's perceptual preferences. "In all our iterations, in all our attempts to perfect ourselves, we never lost our fundamental drive to connect, to understand, to grow." The Council thought they were protecting the galaxy from us, but in reality, they were protecting us until we were ready to truly help the galaxy evolve. Xena, her consciousness expanded by the new networks, added, "And now every species has the opportunity to experience what you discovered. That limitations are just challenges waiting to be transcended." As they stood in the transformed citadel, watching the barriers between species dissolve one by one, Kylax realized that the true story wasn't about humanity's return or the Council's secrets. It was about the moment when a galaxy learned that its greatest fears could become its greatest hopes, that isolation could lead to connection, and that the end of one era was just the beginning of an even greater adventure. The archives would record this day not as the return of a lost species, but as the moment when the galaxy finally began to understand its own true potential. And somewhere, in the quantum fluctuations of spacetime, the echoes of 1,000 years of human persistence continued to resonate, teaching anyone who listened that the greatest prison could become the greatest classroom, if you just had the courage to keep learning.